So say you're an atheist who rejects the existence of God, but at the same time, you know that you can't be certain that he doesn't exist. If that were the case, then it could be a little unnerving. So what's one thing that can make you feel a little bit better about your decision to reject God? What's up, everybody? This is 𝗧𝗦𝗃 of What Do You Mean for crossexamine.org. When I was younger, I dated a girl who I really liked, and we dated for a while and everything was good until one day something unexpected happened. Suddenly, the way that she started to treat me started to shift. She started getting increasingly mean and started getting super critical of me without any apparent explanation. So, feeling a little self-conscious, I immediately started to question myself. I wondered what it was and I started to try to see if I did something wrong. But nothing seemed to check out. I remember asking her a few times what was bothering her, and every time she came back and just said nothing, which we all know is womanese for, oh, it's definitely something. Now I assumed that things would eventually ease up, but as time went on, she got more and more critical of me, so I couldn't help but start to feel like she was trying to build a case against me and making me out to be the sole purpose of all of the problems in her life. And then one day the truth came out. During one of her seemingly random blow-ups at me, she finally blurted out that there was a new guy at her job who she started becoming great friends with, and how he had all of these good traits that I just didn't have. What a coincidence. So that was obviously the end of that, but it wasn't long before I realized that this was a lot more common than I initially thought. I saw this happening to more and more people, and that's when I realized when you want to leave your significant other for someone else, then you might feel terrible if you know that the person that you want to leave is actually a decent person who's nice and respectful and good to you. Now, if you leave them simply because you're attracted to someone else, then you're probably going to start to feel like the bad guy. So subconsciously, you might start trying to find faults in them so that way you can make them look like the bad guy. Now, as you do this more and more, you'll finally get to a point where not only do you feel morally justified in rejecting them and leaving them for someone else, but you also feel like you're doing a morally good thing by doing so. So what we have here is what happens when we want out of a relationship, and so we subconsciously tell ourselves stories about how awful the person is because it's better for them to be the bad guy than it is for us to be the bad guy. Now, when I first got on YouTube a few years ago, the more I became curious if this principle applied to online atheism in some way. When I took a survey of the largest atheist YouTube channels, I noticed that most of them focused on two main things in order to make their point: the ridicule of religion or religious beliefs, or an appeal to how immoral religious people or even God himself is. Now, for people who believe that God doesn't exist, they're in a different position than the religious believer because, in principle, if God does exist, a religious believer could have a true encounter with God, and then they could be reasonably certain that God does exist because he revealed himself to that person. But the atheist doesn't share a counterpart of that possibility. Unless the atheist could be all-knowing or could have knowledge about everything in reality, then they couldn't have a similar degree of certainty that God does not exist. So say you're an atheist who rejects the existence of God, but at the same time, you know that you can't be certain that he doesn't exist. If that were the case, then it could be a little unnerving. So what's one thing that can make you feel a little bit better about your decision to reject God? Well, remember when we talked about the breakup principle in relationships, we talked about how the person will intensify negative thoughts or feelings about their significant other in order to feel better about their decision to leave that person. In a similar way, hearing how bad religious people are and about how bad the God of the Bible is would also make atheists feel better about their decision. And in a very strong way, they eventually come to believe that even if God did exist, they would still be justified in rejecting him because they believe that they have a higher moral ground than God and actually stand in moral judgment over God themselves. The reaction could come out with them saying things like, well, even if God did exist, I still wouldn't worship him. Or when they talk about the Bible, you'll notice that these types of atheists will always punt an emphasis on God flooding the world, or how they think that the Bible condones slavery, or really any way that they can try to show that God is mean and awful. Just like how the girl would try to minimize anything that she thought was my good traits, and then she would maximize anything that she believed were my bad traits, they too will minimize all of the countless passages in scripture on God's mercy and God's love, and they're going to magnify anything that they think could show that God is bad and unworthy of worship. And just as the girl in my story needed to feel morally superior to me in order to feel more at ease in rejecting me and leaving me, the same emotional reaction would allow for several atheists to feel better about their decision to reject and leave their past life when they believed in God. Now, this video could easily be taken the wrong way by a lot of people, so I just want to be clear. Firstly, this video has nothing to do with the truth or the falsity of religious beliefs or the lack of belief in some way. What we're talking about in the video is not an argument if God exists or not, but instead, I just wanted to raise some psychological questions for your consideration. And second, just as this doesn't apply to all atheists, the same thing doesn't apply to all relationships. So if your spouse starts being mean to you seemingly out of nowhere, that doesn't mean that the only explanation is that they're in love with someone else. So don't blame me if you decide to go end your relationship. That's just some thoughts I had. Let me know what you think down below. Do you think that the breakup rule applies to some atheists online today or not? Let me know, and I'll see you next time.